And we're back. Welcome to the Stupid Fans Club, everybody. I am your host, Shaan Donn, and welcome to the club. If you are not already subscribed, please make sure you do so. We are exclusively on YouTube. You can find out about the latest and greatest in college football by subscribing to our channel. And of course, we truly, truly, truly appreciate the support. Um, and you can follow us on our TikTok page at Stupid Fans Club, as well as Instagram that is currently under construction, but you can definitely follow us there as well as Stupid Fans Club as well. Um, we have a great show because we had another great week of college football. And look, we're at the end of the season, so everybody is vying for position. They're trying to get into a bowl, whether it's becoming eligible or whether they're trying to make their conference championship to potentially get a college football playoff spot or momentum into next year, finishing the season off strong. Whatever it is, teams are playing hard, running through the tape, running through the line here. And so we got a lot of action, and we're starting to see where teams are going to fall and where they'll be positioned. A couple of teams clinched berths for their conference championship. Go Dogs. So we'll break all that down, and we will start with Georgia. The Bulldogs beat UMass 59-21 this past Saturday. Georgia almost put up 60 on them. Another great game from Carson Beck. He threw 4 touchdowns, and the offense was pretty much rocking and rolling this game, and looked to be good, albeit against a 2-9 non-conference team. But that's the SEC, and if anyone deserves that type of game in the towards the end of the season, it is a team like Georgia who has the number one strength of schedule. So good win for Georgia, and only one more week. Takeaways from this game against UMass. I think at this point in the season, your team is who they are. They are who they are. So it's no longer earlier in the season. I remember asking, is it time to be concerned for this team or that team? And oh, can you hold off a little bit before you write them off, or can they come back here? We're no longer at that point in the season. This is like we're getting to the win or go home time of the season. We're in the win or go home time of the season. It's a lot of teams who can't lose anymore, or they've had to not lose another game for the past few weeks, including Georgia. So I think we can kind of make firm conclusions as we wrap up this regular season about what to expect from your team and what you can't expect for them. And one of the things I think I can expect for Georgia is to play down to their competition, which makes it very difficult to look ahead at with their schedule because you don't know what you're going to get. Like you see how they play against a Kentucky or that first half against Alabama, and you're like, we have no shot against Texas, and then we come out there and kill Texas. Oh my goodness, look at what Georgia did against Florida. And then we go out and beat, or look how they looked against Ole Miss the following week. And then we go out and beat Tennessee, like handedly. So Georgia plays down to their competition. And although the score was 59-21, if you watch the game early on and even a little into the second half, the separation again, which we've seen from Georgia over and over again, the separation wasn't really created until much later in the game. Georgia started the game down 7-0, which is not uncommon for what we've seen this season. And it was, I believe, 21-14 with under 2 minutes to go in the first half. It was Georgia was up by 1 touchdown against a 2-9 non-conference UMass. This was eerily similar to how they performed against the worst team in the SEC, Mississippi State. That was a just poor performance from the defense. Like it looked very, very similar. And it's clear because you see what they do and how they match up against like a Texas, or how we looked against Tennessee, teams who are clearly much better and we perform much better. So again, which leads me to my conclusion. Georgia just plays down to their competition. This game, when you are going up against a 2-9 team and you are ranked top 10 in the country, or you're even in the top 25, even if you're just a power 5 school, goodness gracious, power 4, sorry, you expect to assert your dominance against a team. You don't want to let them hang around. You want to immediately create separation and show that, hey guys, you have no chance. It's been game after game, especially at home, where early on in the game, you can see these teams with life and belief in their eyes, like, oh, okay, let's go. We can hang with these boys. You have them over there believing this. And this didn't happen against the teams that won national championships. We did have close games, but it was against your Auburns, your South Carolinas, these types of teams, your Missouris or somebody like that. These teams who were, in the SEC, like don't come in there and take them as a joke. That is a sneaky team, or that's a trap game, or whatever it is. But it was never a thing of like, oh boy, Tennessee Tech is coming to town. Oh gosh, Alabama A&M, man, I'm gonna need to watch that with a close eye. With Georgia, it's been that for some reason, and it's not like you feel like, all right, we are good enough to play poorly against this team, but still win because the talent gap is so wide. But it's too close for comfort in a lot of these games. 21-14 against a 2-9 UMass coming to Georgia. That's not, it should never be that close. And you get it, like, oh, maybe on the, or they get a fluke drive, they get a call that goes their way, or a big play where it was just a lack of communication. But they are consistently coming down the field and scoring, or big plays on you or something like that. That's not good. Their first drive, they marched down the field on Georgia. It wasn't anything like spectacular. They just moved the ball on their first drive on the road in a hostile environment, and they scored a touchdown, not a field goal. Like, that is not what you want to see from a top 10, or neither is it what you expect from a top 10 team in the country, let alone a ranked team at all. So that was disappointing, but again, it shows that it's kind of signed, sealed, and delivered at this point for Georgia. They get off to slow starts and they play down to their competition. We look great against Tennessee. We look great against Texas, but we look pedestrian against Mississippi State and Kentucky and UMass. Like, that is, or and again, and then we make it look cute at the end, like our game against Florida, who we will get to later, which is not an easy game and a rivalry game for Georgia, but we pull away at the end, so the score looks like, oh, okay, Georgia took care of them, 59-21. Oh, okay, yeah, Georgia did what they were supposed to do. Eventually we did. But throughout the game, it wasn't comfortable. It was just too many big plays, huge chunks of yards on our defense. Like, and it just doesn't make you feel comfortable, because it's like, okay, whatever. You didn't play as well as you wanted to against UMass, but it's more about the time of the season that we're in. Like, these types of games, that even if you play poorly, you're still probably not going to lose the game. So earlier in the season, it's like, man, we want to play better against a team like this. We want to play better against a Mississippi State because we know we have Texas coming up, who looks great. We know we have Alabama after this Kentucky game, and they look great. And now it's at the point of like, all right, guys, we're getting into the time of the season where it is win or go home. You have 2 losses. You take a third one. Like, you want to be playing your best at this time of the season. So again, just very disheartening to see us still like how we were in the beginning of the season, these back and forth games against poor teams and slow starts. So although it was a 59-21 point win for Georgia, it was not in the fashion that you would expect or want. Maybe you don't believe me. Let's go back to earlier in the season where Georgia has consistently shown, hey guys, this is who we are. This is just what we do. The first time was against Kentucky, as I mentioned earlier. We were down 6-3 at halftime and end up winning that game 13-12. The next time we saw it was against Auburn. Auburn, we were only up 14-10 early in the third quarter there. This was a football game against a unranked Auburn team. And again, we know your certain teams like Kentucky and Auburn, they will play you tough. It's an SEC game. They're tough to beat and put away. So you understand, but again, it's like late in the game, you want to start to show like, okay, this is why we are better than you all. This is why we're ranked here and you're unranked. Let us now show you. I get it. You came out with that adrenaline and energy, but now let's separate. When it's the third quarter and you're just a 4-point game, it's anybody's game against a team that is much more inferior than you, that is concerning. So that was the second time we saw it. Next time we saw it was 13-10 against Mississippi State, the worst team in the SEC, with 6 minutes left in the first half. We're in a ball game with a team that we're like, you feel like it's basically a bye week. Like you're expecting, all right, we're gonna go up early and I can turn the game off or watch another competitive game. No, this was like a down to the wire first half. And then Georgia eventually got a big lead. And then Mississippi State came back later in that game, and I think we ended up winning by like 10 points. But it was just big play, just uncharacteristic play from Georgia at that point in the season. But now it's like, no, that's characteristic. That is a characteristic of Georgia. This is what they do against poor teams. So that was the next time. Next one was down 13-6 late in the third quarter against Florida. We now see that Florida is a hot team and they're playing everybody tough and they're beating teams. So, and that is a rivalry game for Georgia. But again, you say that you're the number 2 team in the country. You're the top 10 team in the country. You know you have Ole Miss at Ole Miss the week after this. We want to see, all right, this is why Georgia is good. It was a down to the wire game until very, very late where we end up scoring a couple of touchdowns and putting it away. Also, DJ Lagway, who's been lighting teams up, got hurt in that game, which helped Georgia, I believe, tremendously. That's concerning. It's Florida as a 500 team, maybe just over 500 now, and they've had a daunting schedule. They should be very, very proud of where they are. I believe they're now bowl eligible. I believe they're just got their 6th win. They had a very, very tough schedule up there with Georgia's. Like they played all the toughest teams, and they obviously started off poorly and slow, had trouble with the quarterback play, and they're finishing strong. So good for Florida. And then again, as we discussed, UMass down, or we're down to start the game 7-0 as they march down the field on their very first drive on the road. 2-9 team now. And then 21-14 football game with under 2 minutes left. Third quarter, it was only a 10-point game, and then eventually we pull away. So you have that much body of work. It's only one more game in the season. This is a characteristic of Georgia. We can no longer say this is uncharacteristic of this team. They're showing you this is what we do. Now, what's good is it's playoff time. So you won't have a choice. Like, you don't have to worry for Kirby, at least, about getting up for games. This is like, hey, guys, we lose, we go home. This is the point of the season that we're in now. If you lose, it's over. And everybody that you play moving forward after the last week of the season will be a huge game. It will be a good team. And so you have no choice but to come out ready and play better. So hopefully we see improvement there. The biggest letdown in this game was definitely on the defensive side for Georgia. And when you're playing a 2-9 UMass or a team like that this late in the season, they're they're looking for little wins. Like, they want to see if they can score this many points. They know they're not going to win the game. They're not going to beat Georgia. But early on in the game, when it's 21-14, and you give them life because they're just hanging around, and it's not like, oh, okay, that was a fluke drive. We scored once and now they're shutting us down. No, it's like, no, we scored here, and we're scoring again. You're making teams believe that they can actually hang with you and they're good enough to beat you or whatever it is. So they're looking for these little wins, and here comes Georgia with an identical play to what Ryan Williams did to Georgia. Ryan Williams is number 2 for Alabama, wide receiver who made the top play of the freaking season against 2 of our DBs. Identical play against a receiver from UMass. I mean, identical. Somebody should match those up. That's a win for them. That's going to be on Sports Center Top 10. That was an incredible play. But again, there is a standard that you should have, a pride that you should have as not only being Georgia and what comes with that name, but like your ranking. These are teams that you don't even want to think that they can. You swat them away like flies. Like, you little bro them. You're just not good enough. But when they're doing that, throwing bombs on, and it's 2 of y'all, and y'all, that's a win for teams like that at this point. They're 2-9. They're not making a bowl. They got one more week in the season. They don't care. So when they get to go back in the locker room and replay that or see themselves on Sports Center or add that to their highlight tape, that's a win. And Georgia allows it on them over and over again. Just too many chunk plays. And, this is just what we keep seeing with Georgia, unfortunately. So a lot of things that Georgia needs to address, has to address. But as I started, we're at this point of the season where your team is who they are. So the only thing you can really hope for at this point is, all right, well, we play better teams moving forward. So I couldn't get up for this game won't be an excuse. So that was that. With that being said, I have a hot take about Georgia, my beloved Georgia Bulldogs. UGA is on upset alert this week. Based on that performance, they are coming and playing a Georgia Tech team. Georgia Tech comes to Georgia this time. And it is a little interesting because if you look at the history of it, for years, it's been nearly equivalent to what this UMass game was. It's been that's basically a bye week for Georgia. We'll be up 4 touchdowns by halftime, and we won't have to really worry about it. As a fan, you don't really have to watch the whole thing. You know, this is one of those games we're celebrating going into the SEC championship or the playoff or whatever it is. This year, that is not the case. Georgia Tech is 7-4. They've already beaten a top 10 team this season who was not only top 10, undefeated, Miami. And they are bowl eligible this year. Most years when we play Georgia Tech, they're either extremely sorry or they are like, yeah, but you're not good enough to beat us. I'm here to tell you, Georgia Tech is good enough to beat Georgia. And hopefully it's not one of those things where Georgia has to wait to get on the field to see that. Hopefully they can just take Miami as an example, who has been in numerous close games and clearly is just a team that's out there to outscore you. We know their defense isn't very stiff, but the way Georgia's defense has played at times in this season and at times against UMass, really the whole game against UMass, you wonder, like, I mean, they handedly, I mean, it was a close game and Miami tried to come back, but Georgia Tech just genuinely beat Miami. And with us knowing that Georgia plays down to their competition, you just hope that Georgia, please do not come out and take this team as a joke. We've already clinched a championship berth. But if you lose that and you now get your third loss, that pretty much makes, and this is still up for debate. This is the first time we've seen the 12-team college football playoff like this. But some say that if you get into your conference championship, it is an opportunity for you, but it's not a thing where you can fall out of the playoff if you lose it. Because you think about it, it's like if Georgia beats Georgia Tech and then they go on and lose in the SEC championship, they would now be a 3-loss team. And then you wonder if the committee is like, are they going to put a 3-loss team in there? But then the counter to that is like, well, why would I even try to make my conference championship? Why don't I just stay good enough to make the playoff and not risk losing everything if I lose my conference championship? Georgia experienced that same thing last year against Alabama. Perfect season, went undefeated, lost in the conference championship, but because it was only a 14 playoff, you got to go play in a bowl. Sorry. Undefeated season, who cares? You lost to Alabama. It's like, so teams don't want to do that. If you lose to Georgia Tech, that now becomes your SEC championship, now becomes your championship. Like you have to win it to even have a chance to make the college football playoff. And who knows, even if you do as a 3-loss team and one of your losses being Georgia Tech, you know, and again, this is all hypothetical. Georgia should go out and beat Georgia Tech. But this is the scenario that plays out. And this is what will happen if Georgia comes out and plays lackluster, thinking it's just the same old Georgia Tech. It is not the same old Georgia Tech. And if you play like how you played against UMass, Georgia Tech is good enough to capitalize more on those opportunities than UMass was. And you'll be in a close dogfight. It'll look like the Florida game. And especially how Georgia looked trying to stop that run and the option plays with the UMass, a 2-9 UMass. Georgia Tech does similar stuff, but they do it better. They're 7-4. So yeah, this is a upset alert week for Georgia. They better treat this like, I don't know if Kirby needs to put Texas in front of them over the Georgia Tech logo or whatever, but whatever they need to do to get prepared for this game and not look ahead and not feel too comfortable and think this is just an easy win against Georgia Tech, our little brothers in the state, they better come out prepared. And guess what? Georgia Tech can't wait to ruin Georgia's season, a team that's just beaten them, it feels like 50 times in a row now. They feel like they're finally good enough to, and this was, I've mentioned this so many times on the show, this, you could see glimpses of this last year. You could see glimpses of this last year in the Georgia Tech game. Georgia Tech made great improvements. That was a too close for comfort game for a while there, and then Georgia pulled away. This year, they're better than they were that last year. And honestly, you can say Georgia probably has taken a step back from where they were last year. So where do we meet? Do you see the concern now? It creates this uncertainty for the last game of the season, which could leave everything in like chaos if Georgia actually loses the game. So Georgia is 1000% on um, upset alert here, and we'll see how it goes. We will see how that goes. But that wraps up the Georgia UMass game there, and my hot take of the week. Let's move on to the Big 12. Colorado was overwhelmed on the road by Kansas, 37-21. If you haven't been paying like much attention to the Big 12 or Kansas or Colorado over the past few weeks, Colorado has been a hot team. They won a bunch of games in a row. I don't remember how many. And Kansas over the past few weeks has like revived themselves. And I've been reminding people coming into the season, Kansas was like in the top 25. They were a ranked team. And they have like, out of their 6 losses, I believe 5 of them were by one score. And so they've been in a lot of the games they've lost. And now it's like they figured it out. And they've now, with this Colorado win, beaten 3 straight ranked teams. They are coming into the game. Kansas was a 4-6 team, and they beat Iowa State, and they turned around and beat BYU on the road. And now they've turned around and beat Colorado. The 3 big dogs of the Big 12 at one point, they've knocked them all down, and now have created what Georgia Tech can create for Georgia, complete chaos in the SEC. And Georgia Tech can't create that much because Georgia has already clinched the SEC championship berth. So, but in this case, in the Big 12, there is like, we still don't know who's playing in that championship game. A lot due to Kansas just going on this game record, season record run that they're on. So what happened? What happened? Colorado, like I said, looked like the team to beat in the Big 12, and all they had to do was win out, and they were going to be in the championship game, which would give them a berth to the college football playoff if they won that game. Colorado tried to hang around offensively as long as they could, and this game started out ugly. They were down 17-0 quickly. And as Colorado does, very resilient, persistent, they were able to cut that down to 23-21 by the second half. So they did fight back, and they were able to score, but ultimately this just came down to the defense having no shot at stopping Devin Neal in that running game by Kansas. It was just big play after big play. It felt like every run they were getting 17 yards on it. And when it wasn't Devin Neal running, it was Jalen Daniels running and putting people in a spin cycle where it should have been a 7-yard gain. Now it's a 27-yard gain. It's like unreal. And yeah, that was what it came down to. Colorado had no answer for that run. Devin Neal had unreal numbers in this game. 37 carries for 207 yards and 3 touchdowns. I'm struggling to do that on NCAA. And I mean, it was just no resistance. Just whatever he wanted. And, it ultimately led to the demise of Colorado and left them out of the ability to control their destiny. This game it felt very similar to that Kansas State game because they had Avery Johnson was a mobile quarterback, and then they had a really good running game with DJ Giddens, who ran for almost 200 yards, I believe, against Colorado as well, and torched them, and that was their second loss of the season. So it felt very similar to that, and neither defense in this game played well or played great, but it seemed the difference was all Kansas had to do when they got the football was hand it off to Devin Neal, and he's going to lead you to the promised land. Offensively, even though Colorado played decent, it felt like, okay, if we can protect Shedeur long enough, and then he can escape some pressure, and he can find Travis Hunter, and Travis Hunter can do what he does and find a way to get in the end zone, then we can score. Meanwhile, Kansas just, here you go, Devin. Run. Like, it felt like Colorado had to just pull off a miracle and just these miraculous plays to get in the end zone. And Kansas had to just play their game. Mind you, they're at home. They're a hot team. They're a team that believes. So, I mean, it was just nothing. Colorado had no answer for that running game. Kansas never punted the football that game, and their defense, while it wasn't just a showstopper, they made the plays when they needed to. I believe they were really energized by their crowd as well. So I think they do it again. Again, they've now beaten 3 straight ranked teams, the 3 big dogs in the Big 12, and they look like the most dangerous team in the conference, but too little too late for them. So their goal is to try to make a bowl game. They could do the unthinkable here, come all the way back, and they would, if they win next game, they would be bowl eligible. That would be their 6th game. They could do it on the final game of the season. So hats off to Kansas and what they've done. They've looked really good these past few weeks. They could have, I think they've won 3 in a row, and it could be 4. They barely lost to Kansas State, lost 29-27. But yeah, they look really good and are a scary team. They are that team that nobody wants to play. Nobody wants to play right now. So great game there for Kansas. Now this begs the question of, what does this mean for Colorado? Where does Colorado go from here? Is it over with? Do they still have a chance? You're saying there's a chance. Like, what position does this now put Colorado in? And with them now being a 3-loss team, like we said, they don't control their destiny any longer, but they need to, one, win out, and they're going to need some help. So their next game is against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is 3-8 and 0-8 in conference play. So they have beaten nobody from the Big 12 on their schedule. So this should be a game where Colorado can win handedly. Like, you want to come out there and take care of business and then see how the other pieces fall in play, right? If Colorado comes out and wins, they need 2 of the 3 teams ahead of them to lose their last game as well. So that would be Iowa State, BYU, and now Arizona State, who seems like they've come out of nowhere and have been another surprise team along with Colorado here. So Iowa State is 9-2. Everybody's 9-2, and Colorado is 8-3, which again is why they're in the fourth spot right now in the conference. So Iowa State 9-2 will go on and play Kansas State, who is 8-3, and that is a home game for Iowa State. BYU is also 9-2, and they will play 4-7 Houston. That is also a home game for BYU. And finally, Arizona State, who is just hot as ever, will play their in-state rival Arizona, who is 4-7, and that'll be a road game for Arizona. The most likely to happen here would be Kansas State beats Iowa State. Kansas State has the best record of the opponents here. They're 8-3. We've seen how good they are, but Iowa State is good too. So that should probably just be a close game. And if you're Colorado, you're rooting for Kansas State there. So if Kansas State can pull off a win over Iowa State, they would then only need BYU or Arizona State to lose. The second most likely here would be BYU falls to Houston. And although Houston is 4-7, BYU has been in a lot of close games. They're almost the opposite of Kansas. Like Kansas has been in a lot of close games this season and they lost them all, it feels like. And BYU has been in a lot of close games, and up until a couple weeks ago against Kansas, they were undefeated, and they just happened to be finding a way to escape these games. And then it finally caught up against them, and now they've dropped 2 in a row. Houston has already beaten Kansas State, and Kansas State, I believe they may have been ranked at that time as well. Yeah, Kansas State was number 17 team in the country, and they beat a tough Utah team as well. I mean, so Houston, they can, when you match those things up with BYU been escaping a lot of teams, in Houston having the ability to beat a top team and being familiar with that and what that takes, that could happen. But I think those are the ones you're circling, really. Iowa State versus Kansas State, and you're rooting for Houston to figure out a way to beat BYU. Arizona State has just been hot as ever, and pun intended, I guess. Arizona hot, but they play Arizona, and Arizona's just not good. They're not a good team. They do have Teteroa McMillan out there, but in that game, you're just hoping that the in-state rivalry energizes Arizona to somehow beat Arizona State, but long shot there. So that's what Colorado will need. Here are the different scenarios. If BYU, Arizona State, and Iowa State all lose, Colorado is in, and they will play Baylor. They will play Baylor in that game. If BYU and Arizona State loses, then Colorado will play Iowa State, and so on and so forth. They do need 2 teams to lose. They need 2 of them. And not impossible. Definitely not impossible. These should be some good games. You're hoping, again, Kansas State, they're your best chance there, and then maybe Houston pulls off upstead or Arizona. So, and then again, all 3 would just make it seal the deal. But you only need 2 of 3. So that is the position that Colorado is in now after not being able to win out, and we'll see how things play out. Should all 3 of those teams win, or 2 of those 3 teams win that they need to lose, they would just be playing for a bowl game, which is great. Like, overall, it is a huge accomplishment for that team and that program, Coach Prime and everybody out there. That would be a huge accomplishment. This is a team that was 1-10 2 years ago before Deion got there. They then ended with 4 wins, last year after getting off to a hot start, and then now to potentially be an 8 or 9 win team, that would be incredible. It is just the tease part that probably gets to the fans the most. To start the season, it was just like, oh, if Colorado can win 6 games, that's like just be bowl eligible. We know we're not going to be this level. And then it's like, man, when you see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's like, oh, all they need to do is just win the rest of these games. And they've beaten teams better than the rest of the teams on this schedule. It's like you start to see and you get your hopes up for something major here. So that would be the result. But either way, I think ultimately, when the season does come to an end, whenever it does, and get into the off season, it's a win-win for Colorado. I think making the college football playoff would be you would have exceeded expectations and goals. You don't expect them to go out and win the national championship. That would be incredible, but I don't know that they have enough to do that. So making the college football playoff would be incredible. But again, when teams didn't even have you being bowl eligible to becoming bowl eligible and then potentially playing in your conference championship, whatever they do from this point on, they've already exceeded expectations. So we'll see how things play out and hope for the best for them. Moving on to Ohio State and Indiana. Ohio State left absolutely no doubt against Indiana. They crushed them 38-15 and made a statement here. It took a while for Ohio State to get started. It started out very, very interestingly, actually. They got the ball first and went 3-and-out. And then Indiana went downfield and scored a touchdown. And then Ohio State got the football back and got stopped on downs. So Indiana had the football with a chance to potentially go up 2 scores here. But that was pretty much all that went right for Indiana. After that, Ohio State turned it on and didn't look back. They made it clear that they just have a gear that Indiana doesn't have. And this is what separates these teams who I could already see them trying to make this Indiana, the Florida State situation of last year and whatnot. That's the difference between Ohio State and Indiana, or Ohio State and Penn State. These teams, they just have a gear, just a level of talent where they can, yes, you are a good team, Indiana, and you deserve credit for that. But you are not Ohio State. Penn State, you are not Oregon. It's just a gap that you can see, and Ohio State made that very clear. And I think this was a bigger game, especially for Indiana. It was bigger than a win or a loss. A win would have been the greatest possible outcome, obviously, for Indiana. But you also wouldn't mind a close loss. We went toe to toe with them. They got the better of it, but we proved that we deserve to be up here. Indiana did not do that. They got blown out. They did not prove. They reaffirmed, if anything, the doubts that everybody had about Indiana and why they were ranked number 5. Were they just benefiting from an easy schedule, or were they actually a good team? Can you look me in my face seriously and say that you believe Indiana is better than Georgia? Do you really believe that? So why are they ranked higher than? So it was just these types of questions and talks around the world. But the beauty of it was we finally would get to see it. We finally would get to see how good is Indiana really? Like, we don't have to wait into the playoffs, put them in the playoffs just to see. And then you run into a Georgia TCU situation, right? So we got to prove it. And unfortunately, because they look so overmatched, it does put their CFP berth in jeopardy potentially. I don't think that they'll fall that low out of it. They might be in that 11, 12 spot there. But who knows? I mean, they didn't look like a team who could compete with uh most of the top 12 teams in the country. So um we'll see. I think the losses from Bama and Ole Miss will definitely help them out, help their chances. They won't have to free fall, because if had Bama and Ole Miss won, or just like, who are you putting them in front of? Like, who are you saying they're this much better than? So, they'll have some room to still make it. They're a 10-1 team, so you know, good to some extent. But Ohio State, we have to give them credit, man. They have answered the bell in every big game this season, including Oregon. They lost to Oregon by 1 point on the road in a deadly environment, one of the toughest places to play in college football, in a prime time game. They beat Nebraska, a tough team to play. Good quarterback. They're turning that program around. And that was anybody's game type of matchup there. They beat Penn State, and it was 20-13, I believe, but it felt bigger than that. It felt like Penn State was handicapped and just couldn't do anything against Ohio State. And then they cap it off with Indiana. And they've just shown up every single time and reaffirmed that this is why we're ranked where we are. And every time they have to prove it and put it on the line, they show up. And the weakest of those performances was probably against Nebraska. They didn't look fantastic, but they found a way to win. And everybody does it. Everybody has that game or a couple of games where you don't play your best, but still able to pull it out. And they haven't done it too much to where, like, when you look at Georgia, it's like this is now just a characteristic of you. This is, sometimes you don't play at your best, but you play well enough to win. So, very impressed with Ohio State. Sky is the limit for them. And now they have an emotional rivalry game coming up against Michigan, and they've shown me no reason to not believe they won't answer that bell. Now, you thought Indiana was a lot of pressure to win. You thought Penn State was a lot of pressure to win. Michigan is going to exceed that by eons. This is going to be huge for Michigan, and we'll talk about that when we look at the must-see TV games. But very impressed by Ohio State. They look like the top 2 team in the country. Staying in the Big Ten, looking at Penn State. Penn State escapes Minnesota 26-25. Penn State almost fumbled it away here. It was a fake punt, a 4th down conversion, and 2 more 4th down conversions that allowed Penn State to run the clock out and eventually win that game against Minnesota. And Minnesota has already beaten USC. I think that was their big win when USC was still a ranked team. They were able to beat them early in the year. So this is easily a trap game. They almost took down Michigan as well. And it's a tough place to play. So Minnesota came in there with a lot of confidence. They're that middle of the road team, not an excellent team, but not a bad team either. And a tough matchup, especially late in the season. And Penn State is able to pull it out. But the question is, how do we feel about Penn State? Number 4 ranked team in the country. We saw their one loss against Ohio State, where, again, they just look handicapped, couldn't do much. And I think with Penn State, it is just the same Penn State we've seen over and over and over again. They're a good team, not a great team. That's it. They are going to make the playoffs, but I don't know if anybody takes them serious as a true contender. I just don't see it when you look at teams like Ohio State and Oregon. It's like, who are y'all going to beat? I think the best scenario for them is getting one of those first week matchups in the playoffs and hoping you play an SEC team, which is pretty much now down to Georgia and Tennessee. You get one of those teams and hopefully you get them in some snow, some stuff they're not just used to playing in, and you lean on your environment to beat them. But in terms of neutral site and just mano y mano, I don't take them very seriously. And it's just the same old Penn State to me. It's not surprising to me that they escaped Minnesota, and that's a tough team. But I just don't really see who they're that much better than. But we'll see. Time will tell. We will definitely get to see it and get to see them put it on the line. Also, another big development here was I mentioned Ole Miss and Alabama going down, which pretty much is a goodbye. Yes, this puts Ole Miss and Alabama out of contention for the SEC championship and more than likely the college football playoff. Coming into last week, I had those were two of the three trap games I had in the SEC. It was completely circled for me. It was the Ole Miss at Florida game. I mentioned that Florida is basically the Kansas of the SEC. They've just found their rhythm and are just a hot team that nobody wants to play. I also put Kentucky at Texas because Kentucky has pretty much faded away since they beat Ole Miss on the road, but they're a team that is capable of doing that. And with Texas playing how they had been playing in the past few weeks, that was a be careful game there. And then Alabama at Oklahoma. Just simply Oklahoma having a good defense, and they've been playing much better recently. And we've seen Alabama struggle with teams like that and just struggle in general over the year and throughout the year. So it felt like those were games that should be circled, and they proved to be true. Ole Miss goes down on the road, and so does Alabama, which again puts them in bowl games here, but likely out of contention for the college football playoff. So exciting. Again, this is what I mean. Like, you're starting to see where teams are going to end up. Some teams are getting knocked out and, lost too many games at this point or whatever the case is. But a very, very interesting weekend in football. Wrapping it up with the quick hits, we got Iowa State. They escape on the road against Utah. That almost put a bigger shamble, put the Big 12 seedings in bigger shambles than they already are. That would have been pretty crazy. Texas A&M falls to Auburn 43-41 in quadruple overtime. That is one of those welcome to the SEC games. You go, Auburn beat Texas A&M. Yes, this is what we're used to down here. That's just how that plays out oftentimes. Good thing for Texas A&M, they still are in it. They still have a chance to make the SEC championship if they can beat Texas next week. So that was Texas A&M and Auburn, and then BYU loses in back-to-back weeks. They fall to smoking hot Arizona State. I've been telling people this team has come out of nowhere to take the lead in the Big 12 and become the favorites. Not out of it yet. They still, BYU still has a chance to make that Big 12 championship game. They have to win next week against Houston, and they need Arizona State or Iowa State to lose their games. So going to make for a very eventful end of the season here. And finally, Boise State does hang on against Wyoming to win 17-13. Genty had 19 carries for 169 yards and a touchdown. He's just an absolute beast. That was week 13 of college football. Folks, we have one more week in the regular season. This has been absolutely outstanding. I remember a few weeks ago, I was looking at the schedule and I looked at when these games would be taking place at the end of the season. And I'm like, man, by Christmas, by Thanksgiving, we're gonna have a lot of answers to some of these questions we have. And I was thinking this a few weeks ago, and so it's like, wow, Thanksgiving is almost here, and it is pretty exciting, pretty interesting to see what's more to come. Again, this will be a very eventful end of the season, regular season here. A lot on the line for a lot of teams, a lot of people buying for position and rooting for other teams. So we'll see how things play out here. That will do it for the recaps of week 13. We will come back this week and go over what we have to look ahead to in week 14, the must-see TV games. There are so many that we have to do a whole nother thing for that, but that's going to be exciting. Week 14, the final must-see TV games, that'll be coming in a separate video here. But thanks for joining. Best of luck to your team and happy college football to you. And happy holidays as well. We will be back. See ya.